by Woman Stands Shining, otherwise known as Pat McCabe. And then I'll talk about her or about the video or about the thoughts. And I welcome thoughts. So let me share my screen. Thought I had that queued up, but I guess I didn't. Here we go.
And I'm just really grateful to be here. I want to acknowledge the original peoples, the original caretakers of this land, the Osage Nation, the Shawnee Nation, the Miami Nation, the Cherokee Nation. So thank you, relatives, for all of your deep love and care for this land. And also to all the amazing, passionate Kentuckians that I meet here currently who also love this land. And so we share in that together. So I come from Dene Nation, so I'll introduce myself that way. So I'm telling you about my clans, just in case we're related by clan here. And just very honored to be here. I'm very honored to be with my colleagues and fellow panelists here. So I really need to start out with a song. The song tells me what we need here. So on my way, I'm trying to remember who it was that told me that the bald eagles are returning to this area, is my understanding. And last year, you also were giving me the history of the Buffalo Trace. So I'm going to start out with an eagle song, and then I'm going to move on to a buffalo song. We hiya hey ya, we hiya hey ya, ho ayo, 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 ayo. Heche wamli glashkawa, uktakia beku, wana ueloyo, wana ueloyo, wana ueloyo, ayo, 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 ayo. Heche wambli glashkawa, uktakia beku, wana ieloyo, wana ieloyo, wana ieloyo, eo, 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 ea, eo. Wachi, wa uelo, wa yonki eloyo, wachi, wa uelo, wa yonki eloyo, ho, wachi, wa uelo, wa yonki eloyo, ho, wachi, wa uelo, wa yonki eloyo, ho. Tanka hoya te ki wa chi e wa uelo wa yonki eloyo o wa chi wa uelo wa yonki eloyo ho. my buffalo spirit. Whew. They are here. So I needed them to come and be here with me. We need them. We need their wisdom. We need their understanding of how to be here now. So I'm going to begin with something that I often begin with to kind of orient us in a new way. Because frankly, probably the vast majority of the people sitting in this room, you were not trained to hear me. You were not trained to see me. And not because of my own personal glory or fame, but I think you do need to see me, and I think you do need to hear me. So I often start by talking about this way of orienting. There's a professor, Dr. Greg Cajete, that lives in New Mexico, and he wrote a book called Native Science. And in that book, he talks about how when he was studying the early anthropologists and how they saw indigenous people, he said they always used the words primitive and childlike to describe us, right? And he said, I love him for this. He didn't say, what a bunch of racists. He said, there's a system of thought going on over there that makes it such that every time they see us, that's what comes to their mind. I wonder what it is. That's an elder, right? And so he went to explore, who are these people that are saying these things? Why do they see it that way? Maybe if I understood their culture, I would understand why they see us that way and why they say those things. So as he examined, who were the authors of these books, these papers about us, and he realized that they were primarily English aristocratic men. So he said, all right, let me take a look at them in their culture. And in their culture, what he thought he was seeing, again, he's looking through his lens, so this is his best interpretation. He said, okay, so up until the age of 5 in their culture, they get to sing and dance and play and pretend all they want. But at the age of 5, it's time to get down to the serious business of being the educated man. And at that point, all these other things can become hobbies. But what begins to happen then is the education is all about training and honing the intellect. And so from then on, that's the way. That is the way, principal way of knowing anything. So when these men came over to this part of the world and they saw us, what did they see? Well, we were singing, we were dancing, we were talking to things that they didn't think you could talk to. We were seeing things that they didn't think you could see. And their only conclusion, based upon where they came from, was these must be very primitive people. These must be very childlike people. Even their grown men are engaged in the activities of children. Well, when Dr. Cajete wrote this and I read it, it changed everything for me. That was like one of the big turning points in my life, because it made sense of this world to me. And I think it really makes sense of this dilemma we're in this topic that we're studying all week here. What it said to me was, for my own people, we engage in the song and the dance and the visioning from birth all the way till death. And so we never stopped that way. We don't have this point where we say, okay, that's comes back here. No, we continue those things on. And what I'm going to say about that is the song is a way of knowing. Did you feel how everything changed in this room? Did you feel what happened in your body? The emotional rising, the soaring, so it's a way of perceiving reality in a very different way. And so I call it a way of knowing. And so what I'm going to propose here, and this is true of what we call Indigenous people, and somebody asked me last night, how do you define Indigenous people? And I'm going to say, for our purposes right now, that an Indigenous person is a person that is of place. And so what I see is that is that these people that we find all over the world who, I mean, part of the hallmark of Indigenous people, right, is their song and their dance. And that's because that's a way of knowing. It's a way of knowing place. So one of the other things that I always say to orient us is to say that if sustainability is the highest and most sought after technology on the planet, who should we be talking to? We should be talking to those peoples who've known how to live in one place over an extended period of time, 1,000 years, 2,000 years, 5,000 years, 10,000 years, in relative health, harmony, and happiness. Those are the premier scientists of understanding how to be here. Now, these same people that continue these practices from birth to death, so I'm going to say that they have a broad spectrum of ways of knowing. Is it a coincidence that having this broad spectrum of ways of knowing and the fact that they have sustainability, is that a coincidence? I don't think so. I don't think so. That's been part of my scientific inquiry. And so I'm going to say that having a broad spectrum of ways of knowing is intimately and intricately connected to sustainability, right? So I feel like I need to say that first before I even begin to talk about inner being, because if I just started out saying what I wanted to say about inner being, you would not understand where I am. So part of this dilemma, as I see it, is that science, and I'm gonna go out a little bit further, and many faiths, I'm even gonna say, have, well, science for sure, is coming out of this intellectual place, right? And so when I look at material science, reductionist thought processes that have really come to dominate our understanding of reality, they're coming from this intellectual place. And what the analogy that comes to mind for me is when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And so I'm going to say when all you have is an intellect, everything looks like things to be categorized, problems to be solved. It puts us in a very narrow zone of perception. And I'm going to propose to us, and maybe any of you who've ever been in a relationship of any depth and passion, whether it's between your child and or with your sister or brother or your lover, your husband or wife, you know, try going at that relationship with your intellect day after day. What happens? No. Y'all know that's not a good way to go. Right? And so that's what I'm perceiving in this whole conversation, is that when all we have is this place right here to try to make sense of everything that is going on around us, we are missing a big part of this picture. So I want to describe interbeing, and interbeing is a great word. There are very few English words that really describe Indigenous concepts. They're completely different structures. In English, something is always doing something to something. And in Indigenous language, it's almost all verbs, which is actually closer to what scientists are discovering. Everything is in motion. Everything is energy. I'm not actually a solid thing standing here. My molecule is slowed down and beyond, right? So what I want to say is that interbeing is a word that relates to, I don't think I said that I was also adopted into the Lakota spiritual way of life, and those songs I was singing come from that tradition. And that's where I get my name, Wiakpa Najimwi. But in the Lakota tradition, we talk about the sacred hoop of life. And what we say is that every form of life gets to have a place on this sacred hoop. And every form of life has a perfect design for thriving life. If we go outside and we look beyond all the skyscrapers and everything out here, and we find that little patch of earth here and there, if we get down and look at it, what we're going to see is everything there is trying to figure out one thing: how to make more life. How do we make more life? The ants are saying, how do we make more life? The birds are saying, the trees, everything. So I'm going to say the plan in this place is life. That's the plan. That's the creation that we were set in. That's our place, our home. And so what I'm going to say is that every single member of this sacred hoop of life has a perfect design for thriving life. And every single member of this hoop of life has to uphold their part, or the integrity of the hoop begins to fail. And I think that's where we're at the moment. So as a human being, my question is always, how am I upholding my perfect design for thriving life? And for me, this is where our faiths can come in and tell us, they have something to say about what that design looks like and what the enactment looks like, right? In my faith, I say that I need to be in harmony with all of the rest of the hoop. And actually, what we say is that human beings were the last to arrive here in this place. And that makes all of the other members, all of the other family members of that sacred hoop, my elders. They know much more about how to be here than I do. So it kind of flips some belief systems on its head, I know, but so that's how we hold it. So I'm always looking to my elders to say, how do we be here? That's why I called in that eagle medicine. That's why I called in that buffalo medicine. In particular for this beautiful place of Louisville on the river here in Kentucky. Because they know something about being here. And the fact that the eagles are returning, good job. Good job. So I guess that's how I want to talk about interbeing is I feel like at this point we are looking at, we're coming down to this question of asking, how do we as the five-fingered ones remember what our perfect design is for thriving life? And I really love that the words humility have been brought up, because I think we could stand to find that place of humility at this point. So I think I'm going to stop there as laying a little bit of a roadmap for future discussions. And I just really thank you for giving me your attention. And I also, I just want to tell you that I've been told, and there'll be more time, I'm actually on several panels more this week, for those of you who are going to be here, that this question that we are working in is crucial for us, that we need to address it. They've called it an archetypal wounding of humanity. How we have been relating to our sciences in particular, what sciences we've adopted and how we implement what we believe we know from them. So we're right on topic, we're in the right place, we're in the right time, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
And so there you have it. Isn't she brilliant? Just absolutely brilliant. So I took notes. I have some things for us to talk about. One of the things she started with was talking about clan. I used to listen to this iteration of who I belong to and my cousins and grandcousins and aunts and uncles and grandfathers and great grandfathers. And on and on and on and on, and be bored out of my mind. I mean, I'm not really close to my parents, let alone everybody else we're supposedly connected to. But what I have come to see is how embedded Indigenous people are in their families, their clan, as well as the earth. The phrase, all my relatives, sounds trite and, nice, warm, but it's so true for them. It's what they live. It certainly is not the Western white way. And English itself as a language, which she refers to a little bit, is all about separation. It's all about this, that, and it. Many languages have no it. There is no difference between us and the rest of life. Those are huge things. They're very tiny, but they're huge in consequence and an impact. So I guess I would challenge you to think about your family. How connected are you? How open and willing are you to claim your human ancestors, the ones you know and maybe the ones you don't, and really embed yourself in your own human family, as well as beginning to think about how to be embedded in the life of the planet. We're so used to being on top, to being separate, to manipulating, acting upon everything. How would we be embedded? There's a quote I came upon today that said, we're related to our relatives, not our resources. It's David Whitecloud. They're relatives. Those trees are not resources, they're relatives. And her point about how you are in relationship with your fellow humans, the ones you're most close to, that if you are always intellectual with them, does that work? Of course not. Of course not. It's the emotion, it's the heart, it's the feeling, the connection that you have with all those around you that make that life rich. When there was a point in time where happiness quotients were a big deal, and people were looking at all the countries around the world to see what country was happiest. And those countries that were happiest were not the richest in terms of stuff, but they were the richest in terms of relationships. They had such strong relationships. They shared, they celebrated, they grieved together. We go have a beer with friends. It pales in comparison. I forgot I was going to prime viewers of that video, and I did not do it. So I'm going to ask the question anyway, and maybe you can remember, or maybe you'll take the time to watch the video again and see what's happening. But when she sang her opening songs, To the Eagle and To the Buffalo, what was going on in your head? Did you watch the pictures there? I would really suggest that you do that again and just see what happens. Because she called them and they came. The connections are so strong. We dismiss what happens in our head a lot. And I'm often so curious when people talk about they know what God thinks, is how do they know? What's the communication form? To get an email or a text? What told them what God thinks? And if you look closely, you'll see there are certain people who say they know what God thinks, and they'll tell you what they know that God thinks. So how does God talk? It's your feelings and it's your thoughts and it's the pictures in your head. And if you pay attention to those and you know that the plan for this place is life, unquote, then anything that supports life has God's blessing. And those things that don't. It doesn't mean we can't conjure them up and that we ourselves don't create things or we borrow them from our neighbors, our human neighbors. But if they're not life enhancing, they ain't God. That's all I can say. She also started off by talking about how whites weren't trained to see her. Wasn't that beautiful? I remember reading things about the savages. I actually remember reading an article where the author was indignant that all the natives did was play. Why aren't they working? Why aren't they doing hard things? Why is life so happy? What is this? Yes, well, trained to see what you see. And the language that you use makes a big difference. So how are you trained to see? Do you notice that training when it sneaks up on you? For me, that has been one of the true revelations, starting to think regeneratively, to think about how to live so that life is thriving because I am living. The way I live actually makes life thrive. Centering life. And the Indigenous people have it down. Now, that doesn't mean that there's no contribution from the mind and from our cleverness. But had we, or when we, or if we could learn to embed that mental cleverness in a way that makes real and rich that reverence and appreciation for life, oh my gosh, what a world we'd have. And that, I think, is the path we're on. We'll see if we can use our smarts to deal with the changes that are coming. They certainly are getting worse, not better, at this particular point in time. And it's a bigger slog to repair than it is to destroy. But that doesn't mean you can't rebuild. And part of that rebuilding, and this is, I think, our work here in the network, is to learn to bring forward the heart, this melding of heart and mind, this submission of the mind to heart, being able to activate that, to live from that premise, to discern what actually supports the heart, to have the courage to stand up for that when we see that dissonance happening in front of us. That's, for me, a big part of what this network is about, figuring out how to do that together, sharing our wisdom, our learning, our insights, and getting feedback when we goof, when we miss it, when those old habits come roaring forward and we're not doing what we really want to have happen. She talked about defining Indigenous. And I know I've actually heard some Indigenous people say, well, we're all Indigenous. I'm not so sure. I think we all could become Indigenous. And she spoke of being of place, but I want to push that further. I have listened to Texan ranchers say how they love the land. Oh, they love the land, but they have no understanding of it and would be offended to be told that, would be offended to be required to get their hands in the soil, to really pay attention to how things are interspersed and to really stop some of their practices that tear that apart. They would be immensely offended. So they love a place. Yes, they love the beauty, they love the peace, but they don't love the place. So loving place, being enmeshed in place, would be my definition of being an Indigenous. We have so much to learn. And there's such a, for me, sadness when I notice how far away we are from that, how far away I am from that. I mean, I feel that separation really profoundly. I have not been raised, and I'll, think about your family life, your family of origin. Was it a happy time? Was that the time of trauma that you're still recovering from? What did you learn from your family of origin? Well, the stories I hear, and this is not true for every Indigenous person, so I know that's true, but for those especially who aren't Western, but live in other parts of the world and have been in their Indigenous families, the stories they tell of how when you were born, you were the answer to your ancestors' prayers. Your ancestors wanted you. They called you forward. They care about you. How different is that from what I'll bet you heard, which was probably mostly no, don't do this, and maybe what a stupid idiot you are. I mean, those are such different ways to be raised. how it impacts your feeling of who you are, what you can do, and whether it connects you, cements that connection, makes it meaningful and valuable, or shatters it and make you want to resist that connection, to stay away from that connection. We have so much to change. Her question: how am I upholding my perfect design for uplifting life? There you have it. That's what we're about, figuring that out. I have become very willing to consciously talk about the extinction of the human species. I kind of think some of us are going to make it through, but it certainly isn't going to be many. But maybe none of us will. Right now, we can't really know how that's going to shape out. The changes are going to be so fantastically huge, so outside of anything we've ever experienced in our entire history, I think. We've gone from cold to hot and hot to cold. That's true. We haven't been as hot as we're going to get. I don't know that we've ever lived in that space. So the question is, how can we do that? And we won't get there if we don't start now. As Gandhi said, you want to be the future you want to see. And I think that's our task. It really doesn't matter whether we make it or not, to some extent. I mean, I'm hopeful. It would be wonderful. We came out of Earth. Earth created us for a purpose. Everything that she does has a purpose, and it's all about, as Woman Stands Shining said, making life thrive, making more of life. Life is the only thing that fights entropy. Jeremy Lent talks a lot about that. we are fighting the second law of thermodynamics by living. So it's a grand experiment, grand. And we have a role in it, or we wouldn't be here. The only thing Earth creates are things that serve life. We have chosen, by and large, as the white Western part of our species, to see what happens if we don't do that. And so now we can see what happens when we don't do that. So it's our time to shift. And if we can become our perfect design to uphold life, we might just make it through. She does need us in so many ways. And the more I feel into that, the truer it becomes for me. And that may be something that I'll bring forward in another talk, but it's just, we are so necessary to the planet. And this is our time to shine if we can do it right. Just because we made it bad doesn't mean we can't make it right. Certainly we have the skills to do both. It's the will, the heart that makes that possible or not. I loved it when she said, we are the last to arrive. That makes us the youngest. We're not on top, man, we're on the bottom. Trying to figure out how to be on the top. But what is true is that life loves life. And if we love the planet, she will love us back. And that's magical. So, as Joe Brewer would say, onward humans, and we'll talk soon.